Hi, how are you doing? Today I am going to talk about the imperial and the metric systems. So watch and listen. I will start with a little anecdote. In 1999, a NASA probe, which was travelling to Mars, was destroyed when it tried to descend, or when it descended into the Mars orbit. And when NASA did their investigation afterwards to see why this had happened, they expected, obviously, to find some sort of technical problem. But that was not what they found. Everything had functioned exactly the way that they had hoped. But there was one thing. NASA had done all of their calculations using metric units, so meters, kilograms, etc. Whereas the company that had built the probe, were using the imperial system. And these two do not match up, as I'm about to talk about in this video. So, I thought it was important to do a video on this because while most countries in the world, almost every country, now use the metric system, and America is one of, if not the only country that uses the imperial system, the UK is in a very strange position where we use both systems depending on the situation. So I'll go through a few of these examples and then I'll talk about my experience with these two systems, and also I'll talk about maybe some popular culture when this pops up. So, the imperial system developed mainly in England over the last few hundred years. It is very old, and this system, different measurements were not interlinked. So, for example, power, when you're talking about cars, we still talk about horsepower. This was, of course, because before cars we used horses to pull things. So that is one example. Whereas the metric system, which was developed, which there was a real push towards this in the 19th century, and it came from basically scientists and engineers. The metric system is based around water. So when you're talking about temperature, the metric system talks about Celsius. So 0 degrees, water freezes. Whereas at 100 degrees, water boils. So this makes calculations much simpler. And when you're talking about distance and mass and volume is, for example, a volume of water. 1 meter cubed of water, so a 1 meter cube, so 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter of water weighs 1,000 kilograms. So this is not by mistake, this is by design. This was to simplify calculations. Whereas when you're talking about the imperial system, things get complicated very quickly. So for mass, for weight, the imperial system is based in pounds and stones and ounces. And I'll give you a couple of examples just to show why there was a push to change away from this. The smallest unit you normally hear is ounces. So when babies are born in the UK, we still say this baby weighed so many pounds and so many ounces. And there are 16 ounces in 1 pound. And up from pounds you have stones, and there are 14 pounds in 1 stone. Why 16? Why 14? I don't know, but that's just the way it is. And big difference, in the UK we still talk about, when we're talking about ourselves, we still say, for example, I would say I am 12 and a half stone, or I am 12 stone 7 pounds, where in America you would say I weigh 160 pounds, whereas in pretty much every other country it's kilograms. So that's weight. And then when we're talking about individual products, we use both depending on which it is. So I think, it seems to me anyway, that if you're talking about things that we bought a long time ago, so for example meat, we still talk about meat in pounds. So if you go to the butcher's to buy some meat, for example, some minced steak, quite often you will buy 1 pound of mince or 2 pounds of mince. By the way, it's 2.2 pounds to 1 kilogram. So if you're buying meat, it's quite often in pounds. Whereas if you're buying something that we only got recently, for example, bananas, you'll buy them in kilograms. It can get very complicated very quickly, but honestly, it's not that complicated. So bananas are in kilograms, and if you go to a gym, the weights are in kilograms, always, pretty much always, which is quite interesting because, well, I don't know if it's interesting, but anyway, people that tend to go to the gym a lot, if you ask them what they weigh, they will tell you in kilograms, whereas people who don't go to the gym will often say, I weigh this in pounds and stones in the UK. If you go to America, they also talk in the gym in pounds and they give their weight in pounds, so it's different even between America and the UK. But that's quite an interesting little difference there. Temperature, we use Celsius, we use metric, whereas in America they use Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit, water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit and boils at, I think, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So yeah, it's not based around water. So it's an extra layer of complication that engineers and scientists don't like. So they changed it. Yes. And then height, another interesting one. So in the UK, when we're talking about height, we always give our height in feet and inches. It's about 3 feet to 1 metre, but people will say I am 6 foot tall, or I am 5 foot 5 inches, or I am 5 foot 7. They won't say their height in metres. And when you're talking about mountains, we also say feet. So this mountain is over 3,000 feet tall. Or Everest is 28,000 feet. We would not say that Everest is 11,000 metres. We wouldn't say that. We would say Everest is 28,000 feet. And when we're talking about planes, we give the altitude in feet as well. I think this is a standard for across the globe, across the world, to say this plane is cruising at 35,000 feet. I think that's a standard. But yes, that's height. Distance is another interesting one because short distances we talk in metres, which is metric, but when we're talking about longer distances, we still use miles, and miles is imperial. The imperial equivalent of metres is yards, and a yard is about 0.9 metres, so it's just less. But yes, we don't use yards unless it's sports. So if you're talking about golf, for example, we say I hit that shot 150 yards. We would not say I hit that shot 130 metres. Which is quite interesting when you have golfers from the UK or America who talk in yards, and then golfers from Europe or South America or Asia, they use meters. So there's that there's that difference. And Americans, when they're talking about the speed of players in American football, they say, how fast is he over 40 yards? They're not interested how fast he is over 100 meters. It's 40 yards, 40-yard dash. So that's sports. That's probably because golf is a very old sport, so it was around before people started changing to meters, so it's kind of almost like a hangover from that period. And then I'll talk about volume as well. So if you go to a petrol station in the UK, gas station in America, to fill up your car, you buy fuel by the litre here. Whereas in America, you buy it in gallons. Gallons is a really complicated one because gallons is not a set unit. There's US gallons, and I think there's imperial gallons. I think there's Canadian gallons as well. That's something I don't even want to get into. For us, litres. If you're buying a can of juice, it's 330 millilitres, about a third of a litre. If you're buying a bottle of juice, it's 500 millilitres, so half a litre. The one exception in the UK, and it's a really important one, in fact, the UK and Ireland, a really important one. If you're buying a beer, you buy a pint, and a pint is 568 millilitres. If you walk into a pub here and ask for a half a litre of beer, you will be looked up and down and probably asked to get out. Nah, you wouldn't actually, but don't do it because you probably get laughed at. So pints, which is interesting when British tourists or Irish tourists go to Europe, for example, ask for a pint, and they get given a half litre, and we notice because it's just that little bit smaller. So when we are talking about how much has he drank, he's had 3 pints. He's not had 1.5 litres of beer. No. 3 pints, he's had 3 pints. That's one big exception. Very strange when I've been to America a couple of times. Everything there is in imperial units. They don't use meters. They use yards. They don't use litres. They use gallons. They use fluid ounces, which I have no idea what they are. when you buy a can of juice in America, it's not 330 millilitres, it's not 1/3 of a litre, because that would be too easy. It's fluid, certain number of fluid ounces that I think comes out to 355 millilitres. No idea why, but yeah. And this comes up in popular culture as well. So a really famous Quentin Tarantino movie, Pulp Fiction, there's a whole scene where you've got Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta talking about this in the car. I think John Travolta's talking about going to France, and he's talking about McDonald's. He's talking about burgers and that they don't have quarter-pounder burgers in France. In America, that's a standard thing, a quarter-pounder burger. So a burger that weighs 1/4 of a pound. Again, in the UK, we measure meat in pounds sometimes as well. But he's talking about you don't get a quarter-pounder burger in France. They don't call it that because they've got the metric system. And then Samuel L. Jackson's like, what do they call it then? He's like, a Royale with cheese or something like that. It's much better than that. I'm not giving it credit. It's a great scene. And then one thing I saw in recently was Better Call Saul, which is the prequel to a really popular show, Breaking Bad, which is amazing, obviously. But Better Call Saul, I think, is just as good. Prequel means it happened before, so it's based before. So even though it was made after Breaking Bad, it's based before. So I think Breaking Bad's about 2010. Better Call Saul is about 2002, maybe 2005. The scene is that he gets a Mercedes in the film, so he gets a German car, and his girlfriend gets him a mug to say like congratulations, and he gets in his car and he's all chuffed with himself, like happy with himself, and he's sitting there like, this is great, look at the leather seats, air conditioning, cruise control, so the car will drive it, will set a speed and you don't need to press the pedals, it will just go at that speed. He's sitting there all happy for himself, oh, I'm doing so good. And then he goes to put his mug, he takes a sip of his coffee, goes to put his mug in the mug holder, and it doesn't fit. Because obviously the car's German, so it's, say, it might be 10 centimetre gap, or maybe a 7 or 8 centimetre gap, whereas his mug's in inches. Doesn't fit. Anyway, he goes crazy, so it's really funny. And my one experience with this was, I did engineering at university, and one of my classes, in fact it was my first maths heavy, so it was my first class that was really difficult. We had an American lecturer, American teacher, and all of the questions that he gave us for examples were his questions. They were American questions, so they were all based in imperial units, gallons, pounds, and yeah, I couldn't get my head around it. I understood, reading now about scientists in the UK in the 19th century pushing towards metric units, I really understand it because it's complicated enough without all this put on top. So yeah, I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. I don't like 14, 16. I like multiples of 10. So divide by 10. So 1 litre, 1,000 kilograms. Perfect. 0 degrees, water freezes. 100 degrees, water boils. That makes perfect sense to me. It's simple and it works. So that's my one experience. And yeah, if you are going to work with any British or Americans in the future, I would say if you're in doubt, just use meters, metric units. Just stick to that because we will understand it's much simpler. You don't want a repeat of what happened with NASA, billions of pounds, billions of dollars down the drain because nobody checked the sums, basically. Nobody checked. They just assumed that that's too simple to go wrong. But nothing's too simple to go wrong. So anyway, I hope that has been informative. Sorry that the UK's in this weird, precarious position where it's kind of straddling both. But yes, that's the way it is. We're set in our ways with some things. And yeah, the world's not perfect, but hey ho. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. See ya!